We're going to take you back to Del Mar Hills Elementary School. As you may remember, that was K through 6th grade. And when you get to 4th grade, you start to do what's called a science fair project. And if you win or place in the top 3, then you actually go to the county and you drive all the way down to Balboa Park in San Diego and you take your science fair project and you put it up on a table and you talk to judges there and they come by and look at it. It's like a tri-fold thing where you have like a big thing and then it folds like that and you put a whole bunch of decorations on it and you put your paper on there and your data and your results and graphs and so on and so forth. So I remember in 4th grade, my science fair project was I measured temperature. So I had shoe boxes that I put facing each direction and I put a thermometer in it and I measured the temperature to see which one would get the hottest throughout the course of the day. And I had a hypothesis and I want to test that hypothesis. Does anybody know what direction was the hottest one? I had south, north, east, west, and I had one facing straight up. The answer is the south one got the most. Okay, and they were slightly tilted, I believe. So my 5th grade year, I did something on earthquakes, and I did it with my best friend Joel, because you could do it with a partner. And so one of the things that was funny about that is I remember doing it, and one time we were sitting there and the judges came along and they were asking us questions about it, and Joel started to really get into a story about it, and he started saying stuff that was a little bit wrong, and I was like poking him like, no, that's not how it was. But he was so into his story. So I just remember that as being a really fun thing too to do with him. I believe at least in 5th grade, I think I got 2nd or something like that. So I think I remember going to the county one. And then 6th grade, I decided to do mine on tides, like the ocean tides and how they work. And it's actually super, super difficult. I remember being really confused because the tides are related to the moon somehow, and they're related to the spinning of the earth. And it was like kind of above my ability to understand. So I took notes and I wrote a project and I explained it to the judges. But I think on a deep level, I didn't really know why the tides did what they did. I could kind of explain it, but I didn't really understand it. But what's interesting about that is that when the judges came by, even though I didn't have a deep understanding of it, I was really good with like presentation skills. And I had put it together in such a way that I think I would have won a prize. But something happened that prevented me from doing that. And that's what this story is about. So unfortunately, when I was a younger student, I was a little bit more of a procrastinator. I'm not much of a procrastinator now, but back then I definitely was. So I always have a lot of sympathy for those who have difficulty getting started on assignments. If you can get over this, and you can develop systems to help you start stuff earlier and be ahead of the curve, it's just a lot less stress. But on this particular assignment, it was, I don't know, maybe the night before or a couple nights before it was due. And I remember I hadn't done enough and I was kind of feverishly working on it like 9 or 10 o'clock. And I remember my mom was helping me out. Either I had asked her or she had asked me if I needed help. And so we were working on it, and unfortunately, when I was working with my mom, I wasn't always probably the nicest, and she was not a teacher, so she might not necessarily have known how to work with me as well. And I remember we got into some conflicts, and not like, knock down, drag it out, but like, we were sparring back and forth. I want to do it this way. No, you really should consider, no, I want to do it this way, right? And I remember my stepfather, Rick, came in, and he heard us kind of sparring, and he got really upset at me for putting it off and not turning it in on time, and for not doing it ahead of time rather, and for like saving it up and then having this stressful night before it was due. And so he would come in, he was kind of, oh, you should have done this earlier, and then he'd leave and then come back. Oh, why are you having problems for your mom? And, we'd be doing it. And the stress level went up and up and up. And then at some point, Rick just kind of stormed out and he left the house. And then we continued working. And eventually it got done. And so what happened was when Rick stormed out of the house, he went down the hill. And down the hill was one of the science teachers at the school. His name was Jim Summers. And he actually rented kind of like a sort of a building / apartment that we had on our land. And so he went down to talk to Jim Summers. I did not know that he had done this. But then, I went to sleep, did the science fair project, so on and so forth. Well, I actually won third place, I believe. And so at some point, we were told that we were going to get pulled out of class, and one of the science teachers, Mrs. Hauser, there was 2 science teachers at the elementary school, was going to prep us for going to the county to present our science fair projects. So they called out all the names of the people who were supposed to go see Mrs. Hauser, and they didn't call out my name, which was strange because on the day of the science fair, they had awarded me third place, and I knew I had won third place. I knew I was supposed to go. But when all the people were supposed to go see Mrs. Hauser, they didn't call my name. So I was like, oh, they must have made a mistake. So I told my teacher, and he said, oh yeah, you can go. And I walked over there to this other classroom, and I walked in, and Mrs. Hauser was talking to the students who had won. It was like probably 5 or 10 students. And I said, Mrs. Hauser, I got third place. I think I'm supposed to be here. And she looked at me and she said, oh, actually, no, you're not supposed to be here. We found out that you got too much parental help on your project, and so you were disqualified. And I remember just going like, oh, okay. And I turned around and I went back to the classroom. So what had happened? I didn't figure it out till later, until I was much older and I could look back on it. But I put the pieces together, and here's what I think happened. When Rick went down and complained to Jim Summers, the other science teacher, about how I had gotten help from my mom, because Rick was so upset about it, Jim Summers at some point talked to Mrs. Hauser about it, and then they decided together that, oh, Mikko had gotten too much help on the science fair project, he should be disqualified, right? But here's what I remember from that. My good friend Jeff, you guys all know Jeff, brilliant guy, really good at science. Wonderful, intelligent. I remember he did a project. I actually think he did it on earthquakes. It was the year after I did on earthquakes. I'm not sure, I'll have to check with him. I remember he had done a project and it was beautiful. It was such an amazing project. I think he got first place. And I knew for a fact that his mom had helped cut out his title, had helped him with the artistic presentation of his thing. I knew he had gotten help from his parents. And I was like, I got help from my mom on the last night after I had done everything, and I had cut out all the artwork myself. I had done the whole thing myself. It didn't look as good as Jeff's. But I remember thinking like, this is really, really unfair. I know other kids at this school got a lot of help, and somehow I got disqualified. So there's a famous line from the philosopher Lao Tzu, and he says, a word whispered in the ear travels 1,000 miles. Think about that for a moment. A word whispered in the ear travels 1,000 miles. I'm sure that when Rick went down to Jim Summers to complain about how I was making my mom do work with me and we weren't getting along about that interaction, he didn't put together that Jim Summers was going to go tell other people and then negative consequences were going to come out of that for somebody who he loved me, right? So just remember, when you are talking about things that are happening in your life, especially when you're talking about things that other people are doing that are negative, you want to be careful about how you frame that, because once you say something to somebody else, you no longer have power over that story. It can go in any direction. Thanks for listening.